Hey folks, welcome back to the Edupedia world, and I am Abhinay Gupta. And again, we will be continuing with the professional ethics from the CA Act 1949, right? And this will most probably be the last lecture before we get into the schedules, the clause, and the parts, right? So I think we have had 4 lectures already. This will be the 5th lecture or the 6th lecture something, and with this lecture we'll be done with all the miscellaneous things that we had to do in this chapter, right? So what are the topics under consideration for today's lecture? Yes, we have section 7, using the designation as CA, right? So every chartered accountant, right, they have been given the privilege by the institute that they can use the prefix of CA in front of their name after they are qualified as a member, right? It is not compulsory for them to hold the COP, the certificate of practice, to use that prefix, right? Once you're qualified, you are always free to use the prefix CA, right? But you need to understand that the institute prohibits any member from using the designation other than a chartered accountant, right? That means even if you are a chartered accountant, along with it you are a CS, you are a CWA, you cannot use the designation like that. You cannot say, yes, this is AG chartered accountant, or you cannot say it's AG cost accountant also, right? Or you cannot say AG is company secretary. No, once you are qualified as a chartered accountant, right, you will always have to use the designation of chartered accountant and no other designation, right? Yes, it shows the superiority of your profession, but that is the fact, right? The CA Act does not allow you to do that. If you want to use any other designation, you cannot use it, right? And neither can you use or insert a job description, right, or the description about your qualification again on your visiting card or somewhere else along with your name, right? So what you can do but is that you can use the initials, right? Like if I take the example, then a member cannot designate himself as a cost accountant, right? He cannot write Mr. XYZ cost accountant, no, but he can use the letter AICWA, right? AICWA, Indian Cost and Works Accountant, right? He can use that initials after his name when he is a member of that institute, right? But he has to use the designation as chartered accountant only, right? That is a designation: chartered accountant, cost accountant, company secretary. These are designations, right? So when you use the designation, you can use the designation only about chartered accountant, right? For the rest, you can always use their initials: CS, CWA, right? All these things can be used, right? But the institute permits that if you are a member but you're not in practice and you do not use the designation of chartered accountant, then you can use any other description but not any other designation anyways, right? And even the letters and the things that you are allowed, right, you can use the letters or the description, right, that may indicate your membership of any accounting body, right? And that accounting body has to be approved by the council or the bodies that are other than accounting institute, right? Even they can be used along with it if they do not imply and do not allow, or do not amount to advertisement or publicity, right? Otherwise you cannot use other designations or descriptions, right? So in short, what you need to understand is that a member in practice is prohibited from using designation other than chartered accountant. A member in practice cannot use any designation other than that of a chartered accountant. Oh, sorry, it's the same thing, right? So it's the description, right? And he can use the letter like AICWA after his name when he is a member of the institute, right? Next we move on to the disabilities for the purpose of membership, right? Who are the people, right, who cannot qualify chartered accountancy and cannot be said to be the member? Is it that category of people who cannot qualify? Yes, we have them, right? Because right, if you want to become a chartered accountant, the minimum age required by you is to be 21, right? Now you have like 5 years course. So they say that even if you qualify your class 12 and 16 at the age of 16, you'll be a CA only after 21. Right? Earlier there was a possibility of going below that, but now there is no possibility left with that. Before 16 you cannot qualify class 12. Right? So the disabilities for the purpose of membership, number 1 would be if he has not attained the age of 21 years. Right? That means if you are below 21 years, you cannot qualify as a chartered accountant, and that is practically not feasible these days, right? Like you may hear in any of the old CAs saying that, yeah, I qualified at the age of 21, but now that thing is not simply possible. Right? You qualify 21. So when you are qualifying 21, you are eligible to be a chartered accountant. But before 21, before attaining the age of 21, you cannot be a chartered accountant. Right? That is a restriction over there. The second disability, which will continue after that, is that if the person is of unsound mind. Right? And how do you know that he is of an unsound mind? He has been adjudicated to be of an unsound mind by a competent court. And when we say competent court, it is about the court that has the jurisdiction and the court that has the authority to declare the person of being of unsound mind. Right? Now, do you know what is an unsound mind? A person whose mind does not work appropriately. Right? Whose mind is not sound. He cannot use logics. Right? He cannot use the reasoning power of his brain. He cannot be shrewd. So he is known as unsound mind. That he is not reasonable, he is not logical with his mind. Right? And he has to be declared so by any competent court. Right? Now if we move on to the next disability, it is that if he is of an if he is an undischarged insolvent. Yes. Now what do you mean by an undischarged insolvent? Insolvency, we know that if the person goes bankrupt, right, he has no money to pay off his dues and everything. Right? So in that situation we call the person to be an insolvent person. Right? And again, the person, when he becomes insolvent, right, it is a status given to a person. It is not just because, okay, you have no assets left, you have a lot of liabilities, you become insolvent. No. A court has to declare you to be insolvent. Right? They have to charge you with insolvency, and only then you will be relieved with the debts that you have. Right? There's a receiver, there's an assignee who's attached to you, right, who takes care of your properties, who sells them off and pays off the other creditors, like in the case of liquidation. Right? But once you become an insolvent, right, that does not mean that you are debarred from being a chartered accountant for life. Which means that, yes, in future, if you gain your solvency back, you will again be eligible to be a chartered accountant. Right? But for that you will have to be discharged from your insolvency. So in the disabilities, they say if you are an undischarged insolvent, that means you were declared insolvent and you are still continuing in the phase of insolvency because the court has not discharged you from the insolvency. Right? Next, if he, right, being a discharged insolvent, has not obtained from the court a certificate stating that his insolvency was caused by misfortune without any misconduct on his part. So over here they go a step ahead. They say that, okay, once you were like considered to be an insolvent person, right, you were charged with insolvency, and then we moved ahead with the provisions, with the processes that we had to conduct for appointment of an assignee or the receiver and stuff. And now later on what happened is you again became solvent. Right? You approach the court that, okay, now I'm solvent, please remove that insolvency tag from me, right? Please discharge me from the insolvency. So the court says, okay, I discharge you from insolvency, that you are solvent now. Right? But in this case, the Companies Act, the Chartered Accountant Act, they go to explain that if you were ever insolvent, right, because you lost all your money, you lost all your assets, you had a lot of liabilities and stuff, that means you became insolvent by your own fault. Then even after you are discharged, you will not be allowed to be a chartered accountant. If you want to be a chartered accountant after being discharged, you will have to approach the court and say that, okay, give me a letter that the insolvency that was attracted to me was not due to any fault of my own. That was a misfortune that attached itself to me, right? But that was not anything because of my misconduct, right? I was not wrong at anywhere. It was just some misfortune, right? That means I don't have the potential of being insolvent over and over again, right? Because if at the first time it was my fault, then I am a potential insolvent person, that I can again be insolvent, so I'll not be allowed to be a chartered accountant, right? But misfortunes that can come over to anybody. So they say that if it was a misfortune and not a misconduct on your end, then get a certification from the court and we will consider you to be a chartered accountant after that, right? Does not mean you become a chartered accountant, right? You have to qualify your exams, right? Now the last one, if he has been convicted by a competent court, whether within or without India, of any offence involving moral turpitude, right? That means if you have entered into any offence that involved moral turpitude, that means you were immoral, right? You were alleged to be immoral with your actions, right? And that is why you were punished. That can be done in India, that can be done outside India. Any competent court, if they have said, right, that you are convicted of an offence which involved moral turpitude, right, where you compromised your morale over there. So if you have compromised it once, there's a possibility you can compromise it again, right? So if you have ever been convicted by a court with moral turpitude, you will never be allowed to be a member of the institute, right? And when you are convicted by the court as an offence of moral turpitude, right, then you should also be punishable with transportation or imprisonment of an offence. That means if the court has convicted you with moral turpitude, right, they should have also given you an imprisonment, because that is a severe issue, that is a severe conviction that is attached to you. So moral turpitude is an action taken by you where you have compromised your morale, right? You went wrong, and you went wrong because your ethics were not strong, right? But if in case you went wrong because of any technical reason, right, that was committed in a professional capacity, then you will not be called to be convicted by any case of involving moral turpitude, right? But if that has been done by the court by mistake, then you can ask the court to discharge you from that allegation, or you can even write to the central government, right? Then he may, by order in writing, remove the disability that has been attached to you, and you will again be eligible to be a member, right? So you see over here that the institute has been playing very safe, right? That okay, if it was an offence of moral turpitude, then there is a possibility that there was a mistake, right? So we'll not just straight away put you out of the scene, right? But if you prove that okay, that was not actually moral turpitude, it was a technical fault, technical error, right? So we'll take you back, but you'll have to prove it, right? Either you prove it back to the court, or you bring me a letter from the central government, right? Any of these things will be, any of these procedures would work for that. The last you have, if he has been removed from the membership of the institute due to misconduct. So if you have been found guilty of professional or other misconduct, and because of you being guilty, the institute has taken harsh step of taking away the certificate of practice and the degree and the membership rights from you, right? So if the institute has done or undertaken those actions once, then you can never again apply to be a chartered accountant, because they know, right? They know your conduct already, and they have, that is why, snatched away the privilege of being a member. And once they have done that, they will not give it back to you. You cannot again go say, yeah, I'll try and qualify again and give me the degree. No, you cannot do that, right? Because that will attract disability on your part to be a member of the institute. Clear with that? So these are the 6 disabilities that have been attracted. That you are below the age of 21, number 1. That you are adjudicated of being an unsound mind, right? You are undischarged insolvent. Even if you are discharged, they did not say that it was due to a misfortune, right? And then you have, if you are convicted with any offence of moral turpitude, or if you have been removed by the institute because of your conduct, right? Where they say that yes, you have been guilty of professional or other misconduct, and hence your membership was taken away from you, then you cannot again apply to be a member of the institute. Now there's again one small topic that we need to cover, that is the last topic that we have, that is the significance of the certificate of practice. Yes, the COP that you apply, right, when you want to open up a firm, when you want to get into any partnership, right, to practice CA rather than getting into a job, then you apply for a certificate of practice, and only when you get the certificate of practice is when you can practice as a chartered accountant in India. Right? So now what is the significance of that certificate of practice? One says a member who is not in practice is precluded from accepting engagement to render services prescribed for a chartered accountant. Yes, as I told you already, that if you want to get into the practice, you will have to attain the COP, otherwise you cannot. So that is why they say that you are precluded, right, from accepting any engagement to render services which is prescribed by a chartered accountant. That means auditing and assurance services you cannot provide unless and until you have a certificate of practice, or your principal has it and you are going there as an employee, right? That is another case where you can do that, right? And the other topic is something that I have already discussed with you in brief, right, earlier in, I think, the second lecture, that once a person becomes a member of the institute, right, then he is bound by the provisions of the CA Act and its regulations. That is what the Chartered Accountant Act 1949 has to say, that once you become a member, right, you are now into a critical situation. You will always have to abide by the provisions of your CA Act, right, and the related regulations. So again, we refer back to the case of the Income Tax Authority, that if a person appears before the Income Tax Tribunal as an income tax representative after having become a member of the institute, he could so appear only in his capacity of CA and the member of the institute, right? So once you are a CA, right, just understand, whatever function a CA can perform, you will do all those things only in the capacity of being a CA, right? If there are any other duties that a CA cannot perform, then for that you can use the subsequent degrees that you have. Maybe you can be an income tax practitioner, maybe you can be a CS, a CWA, a lawyer, anything, right? But just remember, all those tasks that have been given to a CA, that yes, you can do it, right, those tasks have to be performed under the designation of a chartered accountant. You cannot go and say, yes, I'm a company secretary, let me sign your accounts. No. If a CA is eligible to sign those documents, right, then you will go there as a chartered accountant and not company secretary, right? Similar to the case for income tax. Now, the case study, what goes behind is that if, for example, you are debarred from, or your COP is cancelled for 3 to 6 months, whatever it is, or maybe for infinite, right, then that would not mean that you are not a member anymore, right? That is a temporary bar. You'll again be a member, right? If it's a 6 month or 1 year punishment, you'll be a member after that, right? So even during that period, if you want to appear in front of an income tax tribunal, right, you'll have to do that in capacity of CA. But now, since your name has been struck off from the members, you are no more CA for now, so basically you cannot take up those assignments. Why? Because you cannot represent yourself as a member of the income tax body, right? So that is the restriction behind. So if I read out what is there on the screen, then a member of the institute can have no other capacity in which he can take up such practice, separable from his capacity to practice as a member of the institute, right? Which means if you can do any practice as a member of the institute, then you will not use any other designation that can also do the same task, right? You'll always have to use CA over there, right? So now that is all that we had to discuss. Moving ahead, we'll start with the clauses, the schedules, the parts in the next lecture, right? So until then, this is Abhinay Gupta signing off. Please stay tuned for the next lecture, because your core and your real professional ethics begins there. So until then, thank you and bye-bye.